Hello, everybody. Are you excited about this panel? I have the honor and privilege of introducing this great panel and discussion titled Hope in War Against Cancer. I'm Amir Ali Talassos, co-founder and co-CEO of a precision oncology company called Guardant Health. Many of us across healthcare, research, and industry work very hard and made it our commitment to conquer this disease. While we've made great progress during the last few decades, including developing breakthrough treatments, breakthrough and innovative tools for care team to manage this disease, and most recently, simple blood tests to detect cancer at very early stages, still there are some work ahead of us. We need to understand this disease better, and through capturing insights and data, continue this mission of conquering cancer. Our esteemed panelists will discuss what brings them hope in this journey and the innovative technologies and solutions that they see and how we can make progress in this field, and at the end make sure patients would get equitable access to these solutions. Now I would like to introduce Elizabeth Cohen, the moderator of this panel. Elizabeth is an investigative reporter and a senior medical correspondent for CNN's Health Medical and Wellness Unit, responsible for breaking medical news and health consumer reporting across CNN. Elizabeth, thank you.
Thank you so much. And thank you so much for joining us here this lovely morning. I'm so honored to be joined by the president and CEOs of 3 incredible institutions that have saved countless lives and deliver amazing cancer care. So I'll introduce them very quickly, starting from closest to me, Dr. Peter Pisters, who is president and CEO of MD Anderson Cancer Center, Dr. Selwyn Vickers, who is CEO of Memorial Sloan Kettering, and Dr. Kevin Churchwell, who is CEO of Boston Children's Hospital. And we're here to talk about innovative cancer treatments. And so I'd like for each of you there are so many out there: CRISPR, cancer vaccines, blood tests to detect cancer earlier. Can you pick 2 treatments, innovative technologies in cancer detection or care that you're particularly excited about?
Would you like me to start?
Sure, we'll just go down the line and then we'll reverse back.
Okay, well, I'm going to jump in by saying something that's probably top of mind for everybody here, and that is artificial intelligence and how it can really transform medicine and really influence drug discovery, the process of delivering care to patients within an exam room. That's certainly one area that we're pursuing and I know is top of mind for everybody here. The second, of course, is harnessing the immune system in a variety of ways to fight cancer using not only T cells, but other components of the immune system like natural killer cells that can be harnessed in unique, innovative ways to fight cancer.
That's terrific, thank you. Dr. Vickers, 2 things that you're particularly excited about in cancer care.
Yeah, I would say, like Peter, I think it's a transformative age for cancer with discovery like none other. And I would start with tumor vaccines, and I think really driven by our growing understanding of computational oncology. And that's the real management of data. 90% of data in healthcare has been created in the last 5 years. Our management of it is still evolving. But tumor vaccines now, with the help of computational oncology, have an opportunity for selecting new targets on tumors that haven't been previously used or haven't been previously seen by the immune system. Having that ability now, being able to design a vaccine that has effectiveness, that's personalized, really has a powerful opportunity, I think, to impact cancer care. And then I think there's and I certainly echo what Peter says with AI, but I think there is going to be a continual evolution of precision oncology. Most of us know that one of the driver genes that elicits the growth of numerous cancers called KRAS. And it's from pancreas cancer to colon cancer, but it had never thought to be druggable, that you couldn't target it. But our ability to understand deeper sequencing and biology of tumors There are now drugs for the first time to target this core driver of a cancer, which may not necessarily be completely sufficient, but it will be may make render those cancers truly treatable.
Interesting that you mentioned data. How would better data help lead to cancer innovation?
You know, I think the excitement was around when we were able to sequence the human genome, and that was appropriately exciting. But the heavy lift is actually interpreting and actually finding relevant changes in that DNA. And the science of doing that has not been robust. We've developed a lot of other skills. And so the training paradigm for getting more bioinformaticians, data scientists who can understand large language models, natural language processing, to be able to manage that data really answers the question of what is causing the tumor and how we might treat it, which is really driven by the information and data scientists helping to really identify it.
Great, great. And Dr. Churchill, what do you think?
Sure. It's always important to go last.
And you can repeat. You can repeat.
I could just say just what they said. But, you know, I would just add that from the data standpoint, data is incredibly important because it continues to help us define better and more specifically the differentiation between the cancers. One of the points that I just want to make is that adult cancer and pediatric cancers are different. Their mutations are different. And how they, and so in looking at that in terms of how we need to intervene becomes different. And so the data that is being brought to bear through the analysis, genomics, and et cetera, is creating this exciting opportunity to create a more targeted approach to the cancers that we see in adults and in pediatrics. You know, one of the things that in pediatrics that we're always have been excited about is just the evolution. You know, back in the 70s, there just weren't any treatments for our kids with leukemia, et cetera. We're now at a point where we have a 95% remission survival rate for our kids with acute lymphoblastic leukemia. And so that is part of that innovation and the work that we're seeing. And now what's the next evolution? Precision medicine, what we're talking about in terms of utilization genomics, immunotherapy with CAR T cells that we're very excited about in pediatrics, and how it's going to impact not just blood cancers, but also solid tumors.
And now a question for whichever of the three of you would like to field it, or all three of you. With great innovation comes great costs. These are not inexpensive treatments, to say the least. How are we going to pay for all this?
Keith, you can get to go.
We're all looking at each other.
Exactly. You think I have that solution, I guess, but it has to be a partnership. You know, especially in pediatrics, and that as we look at cancer in pediatrics, it's still rare compared to our adult cancers. And so the emphasis from biopharm and et cetera in looking at those cancers is less because of the results or the opportunity. And so the partnership that has to happen between the academic medical centers, the government, NIH, foundations, biopharm, to actually attack and be part of the solution set is what I see as the next, and I think we all see as the next evolution in terms of really getting at the next 20 years. It's an all-in strategy, I believe, for us to really move the ball forward.
You know, I would say of all the things we've talked about that are exciting in transformation, and Peter and I have talked about this, the greatest threat to these actually impacting the broadest number of people is the cost. And it's occurring in healthcare where our expense curve has gone off the chart. What it costs us to do the business is just rising in a way that we've never seen before. And I think if you heard the last session where they were talking about health disparities and who gains access to this, many of those determinants, academic medical centers are not equipped to deal with education. They're not equipped to deal with housing. You will need partners, as Keith said, for us to actually deal with the disparities that occur in healthcare. And we innovate in many spaces. Our hospitals innovate largely around how therapy is designed, delivered, and discovered. We're going to have to develop muscles in how we innovate in care delivery, to actually thoughtfully think about how do we actually get a care that's transformative to populations that need it that might not completely be able to afford it.
Someone's making great points. I think what I would add to what's already been said is that we need a combination of strategic health policy with constructs like ARPA-H that really drive innovation and do it at scale with projects that create transformation. And then we need to fund and support projects that represent disruptive biologic innovation. And if we use the CAR-T example that probably most people here are familiar with, the drug cost is $475,000 for one of the commercially available drugs. The implementation and care costs push the cost of treating a CAR-T patient well over $1 million. And at that price point, it's simply not scalable in our society. And we need treatments that really represent disruptive biologic innovation that come in at a lower price point. As we work on that at MD Anderson in our CAR-NK program, when we can generate off-the-shelf solutions that use NK at a price point of $50,000 per patient, that's an order of magnitude difference. And we need to fund those kinds of innovative approaches so that we can use science and innovation and policy to drive the cost at the per patient level down to something that's scalable.
The dirty little secret, CAR-T, and you've heard of all mention it as a transformative immunotherapy, particularly for liquid tumors. For every one we do, we lose close to $200,000 on every patient we treat because the fact it's just unaffordable and the actual payment for it comes nowhere near the cost.
Right, and to give you an impact on that, at MD Anderson last month, we did 28 CAR-T treatments.
So if you do the math.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's what I really wanted to mention, that it needs to be an all-in strategy. You know, a lot of times we look at healthcare and we just say, well, right now, this is where we are and this is where we'll always be. And that's just never the case. This is where we are currently. And as we continue to innovate and continue to do the work, we will continue to evolve and we will continue to find more and more treatments that reduce that cost curve as we move forward. But we've got to invest in it. There's got to be support for those that are doing this great work for us to get to that next level. So we just can't stop. You know, we get caught up in, well, the cost is this and we can't pay for it, or no, somebody's got to pay for it. As opposed to, we know that 20 years ago, where were we there? We know where we are now. We know that 20 years from now, it's going to be phenomenal. And we just got to get there by working together.
You know, you mentioned the incredible innovations in pediatric cancers, and I'll ask the two of you, are there adult cancers where we're seeing these innovations really make a difference?
Yeah, I think they are. Peter and I we like to talk. Peter and I are both pancreatic cancer surgeons. And that's
just a coincidence, buddy.
Or an observation.
Yeah. But that's a disease that's formidable. And most of our careers have been giving people hope, operating on them, and then helping them learn how to die, because their tumors all come back. And I think there are a growing number of opportunities, one with a tumor vaccine that one of our young surgeons developed, that essentially in one group of patients who had their cancers taken and then had this tumor sequence, but most importantly, finding the unrecognized mutations and antigens on the tumor that the immune system hadn't seen, and then putting those in the hands of a vaccine development company, BioNTech, who made COVID-19 vaccine. It's 100% survival at 4 years. Now, there was another group who had their spleen out, who their tumors came back, and that's another discussion, but those who had their spleen in, and then one person who looked like they had a recurrence, they biopsied the nodule in the liver, and what they found was a cluster of immune cells. They deep sequenced the biopsy nodule and found strands of tumor DNA. So the immune cells had attacked the micrometastasis that was coming back, and now that person's still disease-free. So I think that's one, and I think there are others that are coming along because of our skill sets from our institutions, because of what our faculty end up investing in doing and having a chance to make a difference.
Yeah, one other example that I would give is lung cancer. And when the three of us were in medical school some time ago, probably in the last millennium, we learned in medical school that there were two types of lung cancer, small cell and non-small cell. And this could be distinguished with a 10x lens on the microscope. The cells were either small or they weren't. And it didn't really matter that much. The median survival was 6 months, and it didn't matter what doublet combination of chemotherapy you used. You got the same outcomes over time. It was a terrible disease. It's one of the most common cancers. Lung cancer has been completely transformed into 70 different diseases based on molecular profiling and targeted therapy. And we've made 5-year survivors out of lung cancer patients who previously were looking at a 6-month survival. The paradigm shift in one of the most common cancers is really an example of, I think, what we can do when we apply science, drug discovery, and we apply innovation to a very common cancer.
So it sounds like some of these innovations are being used now on a regular basis on patients.
Right.
There's many others are still under investigation, still in trials, still in the lab in some cases.
And I just want to point out the importance of trials, the importance of the work that our investigators are doing across the board, not just in isolation, but in combination, right, across the nation. Our leading cancer investigators, oncologists, work together to think about what's the next evolution of care, what's the next combination, what's the next opportunity. And in doing that, that's an investigation. And it involves really having a conversation with the patient and the family around the opportunity, but not a defined future. An ability for us to continue to that type of work, because I think that has really led us to where we are today. The investigators in terms of that work is profoundly important in terms of clinical trials.
I think to Peter's point about AI and what everybody said about data and it relates to trials, there is this sort of dream of what is called in silico trials. And these are trials that are totally driven by computerized models. And so right now, when we want to prove a drug is effective, we got to recruit the number of patients to actually get a difference that's measurable. And sometimes that's thousands of patients. But if you actually can design the trial based on what you know the drug targets and enroll the patients who you know have that target, you can do it with 15 people. And if it's 100% positive, you don't have to do 1,000 people because you have the data to both select the patient and stratify, and you have the data of what you're going after in a targeted fashion, which really could save a ton of money and get actually drugs and products to patients quicker. But it's AI, as he mentioned, it's the evolution of being able to have computational oncologists use that data. And when I mean computational oncologist, I mean a PhD scientist who understands molecular biology, genomic sequencing, and he can do abstract math. That's not a natural combination. But that's the talent skill set that's needed.
But it sounds like you're saying when you do the in silico trials, you sort of overcome a hurdle in clinical trials, which is having to recruit these huge numbers of people.
Right.
And that speeds things up. Okay.
That's right. I think one other point that's really important in the use of data and the understanding of data that we all need to understand is, first of all, the amount of data that we're collecting on patients is just going up astronomically, geometrically. We're gathering 2 terabytes of data per year on every single MD Anderson patient. That's the first point. So the volume of data is far beyond the capacity of humans to really analyze. The second point that is super important is that most of the data that's analyzed is analyzed once or never. And this is really the travesty of having vast amounts of data and not having data scientists. And the challenge that we have is that when most of us were in an educational pathway, biology and mathematics were completely separate subjects. Now they're fused, and you can describe biologic phenomena with algorithms, with equations over time, and that's how computational biology has really become a field. And as we apply a lot of the principles of data science to trial design, we know that one of the most traditional ways of evaluating a new treatment is in a phase 3 trial, where one group gets the experimental therapy, and then by random assignment, individuals with the same disease or stage of disease get the standard treatment. As you point out, it's very expensive. Now we have the ability to create synthetic cohorts so that you can have everyone enroll in the experimental therapy, and then you can use real-world evidence from your own data set and data scientists to get a better match than the patient who has the diagnosis and the stage of disease. Now you can match for mutation, medications, age, and history, and go back into the vast number of patients that you've treated before and get a perfect match for every single patient that goes in the trial. It's actually better than random assignment. So we have opportunities to use synthetic cohort design in new trial designs and speed up the process and reduce the cost of clinical research.
It also has the ability to narrow the gap. If we're intentional of including all people into those data sets, we can narrow those gaps. But if we choose to only include the select who have access, the outcomes will be only for the select. But if we don't broaden that, that will be the risk.
So let's just
In other words, the findings will apply to just the folks who you've studied.
Exactly. I mean, that just a little bit more about that, right? In terms of this all-in strategy, and then how do you create an environment and an opportunity where equity is at the forefront of the work in terms of our cancer therapy and opportunities. And we have to look at, as we've mentioned, we are academic medical centers that are at the forefront of doing this incredible work. But equity is not part of our solution sets in many respects. But that doesn't mean that we step away from it. It means that we need to have partners and that we can be a fulcrum for this work. In pediatrics, when we look at the work that's happening in the evolution of care and the opportunities, we're finding that the issue of equity is an issue of poverty, in that the therapies that we're providing continue to improve outcome, but if you don't have a car, if you don't have transportation, if you don't have a food source, you are less likely to achieve these great outcomes. And so how do you work with everyone to really create the equity that we want to see across the board is going to be really important.
Let's talk about bringing these innovations to all communities. Dr. Vickers, you've talked about how you can go to Harlem or Coney Island and no one's heard of Memorial Sloan Kettering. You go to the Upper East Side, you can't find someone who hasn't heard of Memorial Sloan Kettering. Can you talk about that a bit?
Yeah, I think for my organization, I've challenged them, and you can also go to many parts of the ends of the earth, and if you talk to a physician or an affluent person, they know us. But if you talk to a garden variety citizen, they may very not. And so my barber in Harlem, he wondered what I was doing and who I was working for. But in reality, what Kevin was saying and what Peter has echoed is so important to make sure that idea of equity should be added to a concept that we all know that our science and our data is not excellent if it's not diverse, because it's not its best. And we can sometimes get worn out by equity, but we should never get worn out by excellence. And so the simple things, we have one of our community-based scientists showed that she took completion of clinical trials from around 65 to 70% to 95% in people of color if they had a food stipend. Right? If they could just get a stipend to get a meal.
That was built into the...
Built in, they 95% completed their clinical trial. And if they didn't, only about 60% did. And so there are small things that we need to be mindful of, individuals who come from different walks of life, to help us to be culturally competent as institutions to manage them. And a lot of that, again, will be partnering. I mean, I can't make the Upper East Side diverse, but I can partner with communities to help me do that in a manner and gain access to the services that we have.
All of this discussion about innovation, there's so much excitement for innovation, so much excitement about the future. I want to talk about cancer treatment now for a minute, which is that cancer programs, cancer patients are facing really severe shortages. Can you talk about, and it might be different in your institutions, perhaps it's not as bad as it is in smaller cancer institutes, I don't know, but talk about what you've been experiencing in your own institutions.
I guess I can start. Fortunately, for a variety of reasons, we haven't been among the 93% of cancer centers in America that are experiencing significant shortages, most recently in the media, of two drugs, cisplatin and carboplatin, that are commonly used in adult care. The reasons behind this are very complex. They relate to the pharmaceutical supply chain and particularly offshoring of production of certain medicines over time. The interesting thing is that this is not new. And in our organization, and I bet in yours also, we have an alert system that we've had for decades, helping to inform our clinicians of what medicines are in short supply. We have a green, yellow, and red, and we work with the teams to modify usage of drugs over time so that we don't incur shortages over time. The solutions to this are complex. And really require adjustments in the supply chain and the manufacturing. So there isn't a single dependency on one country or one manufacturer over time. And there's a strategic reserve that is created of certain medicines that are absolutely needed in situations where geopolitical tensions cause certain countries, for example, to stop production because they want to hurt America.
So, Dr. Pritchett, it's amazing your institution is not in the 93%, and you mentioned that system with the different colored. Is that this is incredible. Can you share with other institutions, what do you do that you're not in the 93%? There's the system you mentioned. Anything else that you could share?
Well, it's the process of looking closely at your utilization, understanding how you can partner with the physicians and the teams, providing accurate data on where we are, and then being able to project out what needs are going to be over time, and making sure that business and supply chain leaders can order the right medicines and can plan workarounds if we see significant shortages arising that could impact care. It really involves understanding this is a problem that we've been dealing with for a long time.
Across the board.
Not new.
Yeah, the big one for us is asparginase in terms of our care with our kids with leukemia. And it's with supply chain issues, it has become an incredible issue that has actually led to innovation to actually utilize other drugs to replace L-asparginase, but it also delayed care as we work through how do we find and develop the next supply chain to ameliorate this problem. So this is an issue that we continue to see across the board. It's a push for innovation, to be honest with you, in terms of identifying other therapies, other drugs. But it's also the opportunity to think through, as Peter's talked about, in terms of our communication across the board, in terms of who our suppliers are, what issues they're having. Also, what are this is the first time or the only time that I'm dealing with geopolitical forces to understand them, because they're affecting the child at the bedside. Mm-hmm. And so we're learning a lot. I think COVID also taught us a lot about this, and it continues to teach us about what it meant to be offshore as opposed to onshore when the demand is right in front of you. Mm-hmm. And so I think over the next 5 years, this is also going to evolve very quickly.
There are so many different players. This is such a multifactorial problem. There's so many different players here. It's hard to solve it. What role can hospitals play? What you've talked about is trying to make things better at your own institutions, which of course is so necessary, but sort of root cause. Is there anything hospitals can do to help this problem at the root cause?
Definitely. We all have government relations teams, and we work inside the Beltway with our own local delegations to inform. That involves looking at the committees that have jurisdiction over a lot of these issues and having conversations with elected officials. When they meet with gentlemen like this or with our teams, elected officials pay attention, and we can bring data and real world examples. And if you can narrate it to a politician through the experience of a patient, it really resonates with them, and they have the power to make the changes that are needed in the regulations.
You know, I agree. I think, we all live in a world where when patients come to our facilities, particularly Peter and I, the cancer diagnosis is one that threatens their lives. And I think our government officials can understand that it's a both desperate and disheartening scenario when you can't make a difference in the cancer simply because of drug availability. And so we have the fortune to focus on just that process in an intense way, like Peter described, with being able to have alerts, trying to diversify your supply chain. Also realizing we have a little bit of advantage because all we do is cancer. We probably get some preference when suppliers get low, that they make sure we get those drugs that many others are trying to get as well. But I do think having an influence of looking beyond just your business, but looking at policy and the socioeconomic and geopolitical environments where we can have influence is important.
I just want to come back to the equity issue because it's so important. And part of the challenge that we have in sessions like this in places like Aspen is that there's a cognitive dissonance around the equity issue. I'm so glad that we're talking about it. We have to understand and acknowledge that the American healthcare system is engineered to create structural equity issues.
And what does that mean?
Well, particularly when you have health insurance and thereby access linked to employment, no other developed country does that. And that is a reality that we have to understand. The reasons that we have that is the fatal flaw in our system, of course. And the reality is that you have to be employed to have access to care. If you're not employed or if you're at a small company, you don't have access. And many people don't change jobs because they don't want to lose their health insurance over time. And individuals who work as landscapers or baristas or housekeepers don't have access, generally speaking, over time. And that's something that we have to really understand. That's a structural problem that's different than every other country in the world.
I agree. If you look at our capitalistic drive in healthcare, and if you look at maybe back at the 1960s and 1970s, to prove the issue of access and economics, for the most part in America, Black and white women died at the same rate from breast cancer. They made the diagnosis often when they had some mass in their breast that was hard and firm, and they went in, and it was often advanced, and they died at a pretty equal rate. Bring on the advent of mammography, and who gets access to it, disparities occur. And the disparities between brown and white women and who died was largely driven by a tool and an access process that is structural, and it will continue. That's why I mentioned this idea of data in synthetic trials, in silico trials. Those who are the disparate, if their data is not included, we have a genomic database like many institutions, but at the time it was published, it had one of the highest percentage of African-American enrollees, 5%, right? And that's not the population of people of color in this country. But if we're going to be making cures and therapies off of that database, guess who gets left out? Yeah. Those populations and those structural barriers often didn't exist until new opportunities came about. And because of, as Peter described, it persists in almost anything new we do.
So I'm just going to pile on a little bit on that.
Please do.
But with our kids, 55% of our kids in this country are on Medicaid CHIP program. So their government health care is from the government. And the question is, why is that important? Should that make any difference in terms of the opportunity for our kids to receive care? Well, it absolutely does. It absolutely creates this wall that is very difficult to penetrate. We have these incredibly innovative therapies that are being developed that can offer. And we have a system that describes that at Boston Children's Hospital, we receive requests from parents across this country. They go on the internet and they see what's happening at our hospital. They say, my child can receive this care. And then they call us and say, I want my child to come to Boston Children's. And then we call the Medicaid director at whatever state. And we spend 3 months arguing back and forth about should this child come? Can this child come? And the decision is based on dollars, not based on what's the best interest of a child. And so this structural issue needs to be brought in the forefront, and we need to talk about it, and we need to fix it. Because if we don't, we're going to lose a whole generation of children. And if we lose that, we lose our future. And so I think I just want to pile on a little bit there in terms of this opportunity.
It's such an important point because if you look at any other developed country, access to insurance is a function of residency. And when I moved to Canada for a while to become a health system CEO, 30 days later, I got my health card because I was a resident. And everybody had the same access over time. And that creates a real difference between what we have here in America. This is something that we have to really understand because organizations like ours are being told, please work on equity. And we're going to hold you accountable for improving equity when the federal government and the American people don't really want equity. We're supporting a system that has structural drivers to create inequity. That is the reality of the system that we have.
The subtlety of what Keith mentioned about Medicaid, 55% of the kids on Medicaid, we treat children with cancer as well, and we lose money on every one of them. And that's the dirty little secret. If you have Medicaid, we get paid maybe 30% of our cost. So and to Peter's point, hospitals are disincentivized to want Medicaid in their mixture of payer mix because of how it's paid. And then obviously if you have an expanded Medicaid, you get nothing. But it's the design in our country not to really own the responsibility of care broadly for everybody in an equitable way. And as Peter's right, we're being now challenged to say, you need to be more equitable, but the system certainly doesn't promote it.
Right, and just to narrate it through a single state example through Texas. Texas is on a pathway now to go from 29 million to 45 million. We have one of the youngest populations in the country. Only 2 states have a younger median age than Texas. They're Utah and Alaska. And together, Utah and Alaska have a population of about 6 million. So if you're from Utah or Alaska, I wouldn't suggest that you're irrelevant. But the point is, there are a lot of kids in Texas right now. And without Medicaid expansion, these children and the future of Texas will be to see a tremendous volume of pediatric cancer. We're not going to be able to care for those children properly unless we address these issues.
It's so important. I'm so glad in a panel about innovation that we've spent this time talking about this issue, because you can have innovation, but A, if it's not designed for the whole population, it's not going to work for the whole population, and B, if the whole population doesn't have access to it. So I'm really glad that we've talked about this. We now have some time for some audience questions. So if you raise your hand, we will get microphones to you. I see 2 over here. Pick one.
Thank you. Sorry, stand up? Yes. My name is Jeff. I have a professional relationship with Memorial Sloan Kettering, and I live in the New York metropolitan area. And you know, this dynamic that you talk about of losing money on every Medicare patient, losing money on CAR-Ts, $200,000, is not a good recipe. MD Anderson markets in the New York metropolitan area. And I was fortunate enough to have the ability to talk to somebody at Dana-Farber, to talk to everybody. And there's tremendous professionalism between the doctors with saying, oh, if you're talking to Bob Motzer, he's a great guy. Mm-hmm. But you're all competing. How does data, because you're competing with each other in a friendly way. When you talked about you have that sleeve of data, how does that data get shared? Because one of the reasons why I went to MSK was because I felt they were at the epicenter, they were close to me, and I felt that they were at the epicenter. They saw everything, and there was just a lot of data. I've always been concerned about, because of that competition, how does data actually get shared between competing institutions?
maybe I can start someone and then you can add in. Jeff, that's a great question. When you have conversations about data and sharing data, two things usually come to the forefront. First, lawyers. Related to HIPAA, privacy issues, and then secondly, intellectual property conversations about who owns the IP when data is integrated like that. And these are not unsolvable, certainly, and we have excellent examples. Selwyn's organization and ours have partnered together with philanthropic support, Dana-Farber, Johns Hopkins, and MIT in an organization called Breakthrough Cancer, with a $250 million philanthropic gift in 4 specific cancers. And there's a data sharing agreement that's been put into place that is really best in class, Selwyn.
It is.
And data scientists from these organizations have come together. There are policies about how the data is going to be shared. The lawyers have been properly engaged in the right ways, and the IP issues have been worked out. That's an excellent example of significant collaboration supported by philanthropy with leading institutions partnering in 4 serious cancers going forward. I see this as something that is so important over time for us to really work on, because when we look at the donors, the philanthropists that we have, they want to see collaboration. They know that not one organization is going to solve these problems. And bona fide collaboration is something that we are really all about and super interested in as an organization.
Yeah, I think I fully agree. I think that the data sharing can often occur in academic associations where there's particularly peer review publications. Peter mentioned the fact that there are large philanthropic organizations that now demand collaboration. But you speak about probably the biggest hurdle is how do you share that clinical data and that data related to innovation? And Peter probably put the 2 things that are most challenging: the legal guidelines and the cost and IP investment and structure. And as much as we are true academic mission organizations, we are also businesses. And that's the unfortunate thing of healthcare. It is a $1 trillion business in America. And the things that we love that we talk about, we can't do if we don't make money. So profit is not a 4-letter word, loss is. And that's part of the driver that we have to look at in how we go forward, as much as we want to actually partner and collaborate. And we will do more, because I think it will be in our interest. Because not everything is a competition, but in the environments that we're in, we have to be very mindful of that responsibility that we have to our organizations.
Now, I think it's also important to really understand the business model that underpins American medicine. It involves cross-subsidization. And the reality is that when a Medicaid patient or a Medicare patient seeks care in our organizations, we lose money on every single Medicare patient. And if you understand that cancer occurs in older people, you can understand the economic impact on that, us. The only way we can really create a solvent organization is to have commercial payers and to charge them higher rates over time so we can cross-subsidize. And in a setting where you're operating a large hospital, you're obligated to care for everyone that comes in your emergency room. And so you may be seeing people who have no insurance or who are underinsured, and if they come with a condition that requires hospital admission, you cannot transfer them to another facility. You own their care and the economic costs associated with their care. The only way that you can remain solvent over time is to ensure that you can cross-subsidize from an insured group of individuals that you're providing care for. That's a very fragile model if you really examine it in great detail over time. And the paradox behind this is that American companies are paying for this. If you really unpack it and understand exactly what it means, because most companies are self-insured, and now they are paying at a higher rate than they really should, so that we can cross-subsidize and care for everybody else over time.
I would just add to your question in terms of collaboration is that The work in pediatrics is that we have defined collaboratives across the country for disease types where the investigators, the physicians work in real concert in terms of evaluating patients, getting the data in, et cetera. The only other thing I would add is that collaboration is also based on leadership. And, you know, the leadership you see up here on the dais is just phenomenal in terms of the next 5, 20 years, in terms of that type of leadership and that type of collaboration that'll occur.
Let's see. I'll take a question over here.
Hi, I'm Erwin Tan. I'm a geriatrician. I work for AARP. Was recently at a geroscience summit at NIH, and there was a discussion about senolytics, which can affect the biological rate of aging, and there was interest in ameliorating the impact of advanced aging syndromes in cancer survivors, and also the potential for geroscience to potentially prevent cancers in the future. Still far off, but is that something that you're actively looking at right now, or is that? I mean, most of it's in phase 1 trials right now.
Actively looking at
the impact of senolytics, both in terms of treating like advanced aging syndromes in adult survivors of childhood cancer, or potentially even the idea that in reducing the rate of biological aging, we can prevent cancers in the future.
I missed the word, the impact of
geroscience, which is the biological rate of aging, or senolytics. So senolytic cells are cells that are not able to reproduce. They're sort of frozen, often for good reasons, because they're sort of precancerous. But the idea is that there are potentially interventions that can, eliminate the senolytic cells. And there's mitochondrial interventions. There are a whole host of interventions associated with this idea called geroscience.
Like pomegranate juice.
Pomegranate juice, there we go.
Or physical activity diet.
There's one right out there, okay. Anybody have any thoughts on that?
I think it's the evolution of the concept that aging is a disease, and that's an evolution that's occurring. I don't know that we have a direct, we certainly have a growing interest in survivorship and how that impacts cancer, or I would say we have an interest in survivorship. We have an interest in people living with cancer. I don't know that we've gotten to that space of looking at senolytics of just how do we slow aging down and how does that affect actually what you would argue the incidence of cancer, because people get cancer when they get older. I don't know, maybe at Anderson, but I can't tell you that we have anything on that now.
We have a small interest in this. It could certainly evolve into something bigger. I think the area that we're spending more time looking at is the interface between dementia and cancer. And when you look closely at large populations, you can see that patients who get Alzheimer's disease have a lower incidence of cancer, and patients who have cancer have a lower frequency of developing age-related dementia. There is certainly a hypothesis that as we age over time, there's some kind of branch point, which obviously has biologic drivers that cause you to move in one direction or another. And what we want to try to figure out is how can we create a third pathway.
Yeah, neither of those pathways are good.
That's right. Really the search for that third pathway is a sharp area of focus that we have at MD Anderson.
I think we have time for one very short question. Go ahead. Hold on one second.
Bender from Washington, D.C. I have a question. This was talking about the war on cancer, but the National Cancer Institute in 1972 created the Comprehensive Cancer Center. And I was always told, I've had cancer, my brother, my mother, don't go anywhere unless it is a Comprehensive Cancer Center, yet there are only 36 states that have them. So are those states getting less than the proper care? And in some of the poorer neighborhoods, they don't even have access to the comprehensive cancer centers. So how can everybody get the same care? When my brother had multiple myeloma, I called some of the major hospitals and they told me to go take him to Arkansas first, because there was a Dr. Berlogi, I think from MD Anderson. But I called some of the major comprehensive cancer centers, and that's what I was told. And I've also been told certain hospitals are better with lung cancer, are better with multiple myeloma. So how does the average person wade through that? Because there's so many different kinds of cancers.
Yeah, so in '71 was an advent for the war on cancer, and Memorial, MD Anderson, and Roswell Park were the first three, and since then there are 52 now. They're only in 36 states. And it's a complex issue with a common problem of how do you get equal care for everybody independent of where they are. And it's overlaid with the challenges of how do you have a fair distribution of talent and physician skills, because those cancer centers are driven by talented docs who do science and care and write these grants to get that notification. And then there are tiers. The Boston Children is a really unique tier of pediatric hospitals. Anderson and Memorial are unique tiers of cancer hospitals, even in that class of comprehensive cancer centers, because of the talent and the investment we make in just one thing. Most of those cancer centers are attached to other academic health systems, so cancer is a value. It's not their only priority. Policy, economics, and talent are the things that are probably the driver of how do you make this expansive for everybody. And arguably maybe above my pay grade. Peter, you might.
We've run out of time, but if there is, do you want to?
I'll just say briefly, the National Cancer Act was an amazing piece of policy. And we could probably have a whole session about that to talk about the downstream effects of that and how it affected not just cancer, but biomedical research in America in very, very significant ways. The other part of your question is really important. It relates to the consumerism and how do people find trusted information about cancer. That's another session that we can have next year to really talk about. It really requires organizations to step up, and it requires us to move beyond where we are today, where most patients type their diagnosis into Google, or perhaps now into ChatGPT, to try to understand what they should do. We've got to move beyond that over time, and probably our organizations can partner and lead in those efforts.
Thank you all so much. This has really been fascinating. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.